How old do you have to be to serve God? When is it the right age to serve? Perhaps in your church, perhaps in a ministry, perhaps going to the mission field. What's an appropriate age? Well, today we're going to see in First Chronicles, David addressing that very thing. David giving a structure of how old you have to be to serve. And we're going to see that today when we come right back. Hi, and welcome to Bible Study with Friends, where our goal is to help you get more impact from your Bible study. I'm here with my friend Kyle Grinstead, and Kyle and I are going to continue our study in the great book of First Chronicles. We're going to be in the 23rd chapter today, Kyle, and we're going to talk about the temple. Now, we're in a section. In fact, I'm going to show you here what I've done. This is a good example of the advantages of outlining your chapters. So we're going to be in a section of the organization of the temple that goes from 23 verse 1 all the way to 26 verse 32. So for the next 3 chapters, we're going to be talking about the temple and David, his input into the temple. And this chapter, the organization of the Levite houses. And we're going to do that as we get into this, and I'll show you how the outline will affect that. But one of the things that I want to talk about real quick is when is this being written? When is the time frame for First Chronicles?
Yeah, when the Israelites are about to come back from the exile.
Come back from the captivity in Babylon, right?
The captivity, yep.
And how long was that captivity?
Was that the 70-year one?
70 years. Okay. We're going to look at them going back to rebuild the temple. And these sections that he's talking about the temple is he's talking about David building, or Solomon, David's son, the first temple, the temple that's destroyed. So he's writing about a section of history that is long past for the people reading this that are about to go out of the captivity into Jerusalem to rebuild the nation, right?
Okay.
So what the chronicler is doing here is he's writing about the past to be prepared for the future. And
Okay.
he's seeing a structure in the past that's going to affect the structure of the temple in the future. Practices based upon the original template that David sets up. That makes sense?
Yeah.
You see what we're doing?
Uh-huh.
So when he's talking about all this temple stuff and all these people, this is way back. This is David having a kingdom, Solomon having a kingdom. When Solomon dies, the kingdom is divided. Assyria comes down and attacks the north. Then finally, over all those years, Babylon comes in and takes over, and the captivity starts.
Okay.
Now, I'm going to refer to that a number of times because we have to kind of keep that in mind as we're reading this from the perspective of the reader. We're talking about ancient history and how it is going to affect their future as they go to rebuild Jerusalem and the temple. Okay, we have that perspective?
Yeah.
We're going to do an overview of this chapter. We're not going to get into the weeds. You can do that on your own if you want. But we're going to get a sense of what David is trying to communicate to the people coming out of the Babylonian captivity and going into Jerusalem. So let's look at this. I want you to read the first 6 verses.
Okay. Now when David reached old age, he made his son Solomon king over Israel. And he gathered together all the leaders of Israel with the priests and the Levites. The Levites were numbered from 30 years old and upward, and their number by census of men was 38,000. Of these, 24,000 were to oversee the work of the house of the Lord, and 6,000 were officers and judges. And 4,000 were gatekeepers, and 4,000 were praising the Lord with the instruments which David made for praise. David divided them into divisions according to the sons of Levi, Gershon, Kohath, and Merari.
Now, this is interesting because this is David setting up the organization for the service in the temple itself. This isn't going back to Jerusalem. This is going back to the temple. In verse 3, when he says the Levites were numbered from 30 years old and upward, that's an interesting stat. Now, we're not going to read it, but if you go back to Numbers chapter 4, verse 30, it clearly, under the inspiration of the scriptures, lays out that the priesthood should be for men over 30 and under 50.
Okay.
Not only in Numbers, but a number of other places, it lays out that the Levites who served as priests needed to be over 30 and under 50, right?
Okay.
Now, an interesting thing to think about is this is being written to people coming out to reestablish the temple, and it's basically saying to serve as a priest, not only do you have to have this heritage and be related to these people that he's about to talk about, but you also have to be over 30 and under 50. Now, how long have they been in captivity?
70 years.
70 years. So now at the end of that captivity, to say the priest has to be over 30 and under 50, what does that mean in relation to the captivity?
They were born there.
Everybody who's going to serve as a priest is going to be born in Babylon.
Yeah.
There are going to be no old men that are 90 that remember what it was like before, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody who serves is going to be over 30 and under 50. They're going to be born during the captivity. Now, they're going to prove their heritage because at the end of these 6 verses, he talks about all the Levites have got to be related and be able to prove they're related to the sons of Levi. Levi was one of the 12 sons of Israel, and Levi's sons were going to establish the priesthood and establish the worship of God in the temple.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that this whole reminder that when they go out of Babylon to serve God in the temple, they need to be over 30 and under 50, which puts a parenthesis of people born in the Babylonian captivity. So these are people who are maybe unfamiliar with the details of the worship. They're going to reestablish the temple and they want to do it right. We've talked about that. So this is going to give them the details of who does what.
Yeah.
Now, the figures you mentioned, if we go back to these verses, the figures you mentioned, 38,000 men, and of these, 24,000 to work in the house, 6,000 to be officers and judges. I want to make a note about this 6,000. These are 24,000 who are going to serve in the house of the Lord. This is the temple. 6,000 were officers and judges. These were not going to serve in the temple. Remember when we did the Bible study on the cities of refuge?
Yeah.
And that the Levites were going to have these cities spread through all of Israel. They were going to be kind of administrative centers where the Levites were going to run the administration of these cities of refuge.
Okay.
So this 6,000 men who are officers and judges are administrative people that are going to be spread throughout the whole nation of Israel.
Got it.
As officers and judges in these various centers. It would be like setting up county seats where there's a county government that administers that whole area. That's what's going to happen with the officers and the judges.
Okay.
And then he goes back to people serving in the temple. The 4,000 gatekeepers. We've talked about gatekeepers. 4,000 who were praising the Lord in their worship bands. We've talked about that, and we're going to talk more about it in the next few chapters. So this is kind of an overview. Now, this is the bulk number. He has not broken this 38,000 into specific families or specific tribes, right?
Yeah.
All these numbers, the 38,000, the 6,000, the 4,000, those are all of the Levites.
Okay.
All right. And then he spends some time organizing them. So let me show you where the outline takes us. This first section, from verse 7 to verse 11, is it talking about? Now, remember, in verse 6, all these people are divided into 3 divisions. So they're going to be related to Gershon, to Kohath, or to Merari. Now, the first organization is the oldest, and that is the organization of the Gershonites. Then he talks about these sons. That's the first organized thing. And there's a little comment here at the verse 11. It says they didn't have many sons, so they became a father's household, one class. Did you notice that word class? There's a little number there, and it basically means in the Hebrew a mustering.
Okay.
So these families are organized into musterings. So under the Gershonites, they wanted to have a mustering of these families under one of the sons of the son of Levi. You see what I'm saying?
Uh-huh.
So these musterings, now that becomes important a little later when they do the organization in the temple. If they need somebody to serve, they do a mustering. You see that same thing with warfare. When the army needed to go out, they would do a mustering of all the families, except the Levites. So the Levites had their own mustering for service in the temple and in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
We continue on seeing this outline. We saw the Gershonites. The next son is Kohath, and that starts in verse 12. The Kohathites are organized, and it goes from verse 12. As you can see here in the margin, I've got this arrow that says this is a continuation of that section of
The Kohathites?
yeah, that's this section that continues on. And it goes down to verse 20. This is the descendants of Aaron and Moses. And the one thing I wanted to see out of this little section is verse 13 that says Aaron was set apart to sanctify him. Sanctified means to be set apart as most holy, he and his sons forever, to burn incense before the Lord, to minister to him, and to bless in his name forever. Now, these are the priests that actually do the services in the temple, that actually do the sacrifices, that actually are at the altar. And out of the line of Aaron has got to be the high priest who goes in once a year and blesses the people and himself, for that matter. Out of the line of Aaron is where we get the priests to actually officiate in the services itself, doing the sacrifices, doing the actual rituals of worship. Okay, that makes sense? Let's see the differentiation between priests who are servants, gatekeepers, or in the band. They're not priests that do the actual services.
Yeah.
And out of that, we get that verse that Aaron is establishing the priesthood who officiate. Now, our outline continues. So if you see from verse 21, we have the Merarites, the descendants of Merari, okay? And you get that organization from 21 to 23. And then you get a section that starts back up in 24. And this is where I want to come back down and talk a little bit here. I want you to read verse 24.
Okay. These were the sons of Levi according to their fathers' households, even the heads of the fathers' households of those of them who were counted in the number of names by their census, doing the work for the service of the house of the Lord, from 20 years old and upward.
Oh, wait a second. You notice that he just said, this has been a counting of all of those numbers that we saw up in verse 1 and 2, right?
Yep.
And he basically said, this is them for doing the work of the service of the house of the Lord from 20 years old and upward. Now, there was a lot of discussion because we saw earlier that to be a Levite and to serve in the temple, you had to be 30 years old and under 50.
Yep.
And all of a sudden, David says, these are for service in the house of the Lord from 20 years old and up. And a lot of the scholars I read were all confused and said, in fact, a couple of them said, David is changing the law that we see in Numbers and Leviticus of the priests have to be 30 years, and he's lowering that in order to get more numbers. And that just doesn't make sense to me. David is not one to fool with the scriptures,
Yeah.
to fool with the inspiration of God's word that says priests have to be 30 years old. So if you say David doesn't change the scriptures, and I think that's an assumption we can make, Kyle.
Yeah.
Then what is he talking about? And I think what he's doing that's new is he is establishing a group of people under the priests who are 30 to 50, who at a younger age, they'll serve the priests. They're not priests, but they'll serve the priests. And we see that if we read the scriptures here. Let's look at these verses, because I think it's clear if we're not all shook up about David changing the scriptures here. And if we look at verse 25, he says that David said, the Lord God of Israel has given us rest, and he dwells in Jerusalem forever. Also, the Levites will no longer have to carry the tabernacle and do all that work. They'll be servants in the temple that I've set out, right? And then in verse 27, he says, by the last words of David, the sons of Levi were numbered from 21 years old and upwards. And then he says, for their office is to assist the sons of Aaron with the service of the house of the Lord. You see that?
Yep.
So he goes, their office is to assist the sons of Aaron with the service in the house. He's basically talking about, when he says their office, he's not talking about the office of the priesthood. He's talking about the office that the 20-year-olds and older will serve.
Okay.
So what David is doing is good for our churches. If you're under 30 and you say, well, I'm 20, I'm an adult, but where can I serve? Basically, David is saying there are places to serve for the younger people who can assist the older people who are doing the administrative serving.
Okay.
It would be like in our church, Kyle, where we have interns who are young guys. They're not pastors yet. They're young guys, but their job is to assist the pastors.
Okay.
So David is setting up a structure for younger people to be of assistance in serving. And that speaks to us who are younger. Sorry, I couldn't keep a straight face there. But it really speaks to a place in our fellowships for younger people to serve the older administrative people, the pastors, for example. And look what it says here in these verses. This is where I get this from. It says, they will assist the sons of Aaron with the service of the house of the Lord in the courts and in the chambers. Now that's in the courts where they worship, but also in the chambers is in their bedrooms, in the places where they eat, in the places where they're doing their normal stuff, in the purifying of all the holy things, even the work of service of the house of the Lord, and with the showbread and the fine flour and the grain. We've talked about this before, that there were jobs in the temple that were house cleaning, that were baking. Remember when we talked about that?
Yeah.
There are jobs to do that are baking the bread. There are jobs to do that keep track of the ingredients. Okay. David is basically making it clear that those jobs don't have to be for people 30 to 50. Those jobs can be for younger people who want to serve, but can't serve in the offices that God's word says you have to be 30 to 50.
Okay.
So he's setting up an opportunity from our perspective, what we can take away from this chapter. Yes, David is organizing the priesthood, and he's setting out the families that serve in the priesthood, especially Aaron's family. But he's also saying, hey, there is a place for all of the families. Anybody who's under 30 and over 20 has a place where they can serve. Now, it's interesting. He also says, if you look at that verse again, it says from 20 upwards. So you might be 45 and you go, I'm not really called to be a priest or an administrative official. I like serving as an assistant. I like doing the housework. I like baking the bread. I like cleaning the furniture. And David is basically making it clear that there is a place for you in service. So our takeaway for us today, our application would be what?
I think it'd be, if you're outside of that younger age range, maybe find opportunities for younger people to serve within the church. And if
Okay.
you're in maybe that younger age range, look for those opportunities, try to get more plugged in and serve where you can.
That's right. God may very well call you to a place of service as a young adult, serving in the church, saying, what can I do to clean the furniture? What can I do to straighten up? What can I do to help the pastors clean their office or organize their duties?
Yeah.
And this is new, where David is setting up a structure. Numbers and Leviticus don't set up something for younger people. But David knows that coming out of 70 years of captivity, there are going to be 30 and 50-year-olds who are born during the captivity. But what about the young people who were also born during that captivity? What are they going to do? Now, they're going to be able to build the walls, and we talked about that, do the sheep, and we talked about that in earlier chapters. But in the temple specifically, there are places for young people in those families to serve God in the temple by assisting the people who serve God in the temple. And we could think about that, and I hope you do. And I hope this has been a blessing to you. I know that there are people who watch our videos who are 20 to 30 years old. And I'm speaking directly to you. There are places for you to serve in the church if you look for them. Today we've been talking about serving God at whatever age you are. I want to make a recommendation to you of a couple of things. Number one, if you're new to our study, I'm going to give you a link to go back to the very first one and pick up from there. And I also recommend a video called Wisdom for the Young and Old. It's out of the book of Ecclesiastes, the 11th chapter, and I think you'll enjoy it. If you do, be sure to hit the like button. And listen, we're going to continue our study in First Chronicles next week. And until then, God bless you.